You could also sit down. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction to Jem and Ro, and then I'm going to leave them to start a conversation together. It's not been very well choreographed, so it's going to be an impromptu conversation. And Ro's been at this for some time. She developed and wrote Carbon Conversations in 2006. And that's the whole approach to how do you have these difficult conversations about things that are off the social list. And they certainly were completely off it in 2006, and maybe they're now more approachable. And more recently, Jem has, I think, brought a sort of courage to speaking out. Maybe there's a time when those of us who are involved with this were told, you mustn't make people afraid. It's bad communication. And selling fear doesn't work. But in a way, that's sort of infantilization. And I feel that Jem has very courageously come out and brought some, and he's got a wonderful audience. I'm sure a lot of you have come because of him. So we think it will be a profound day. I'd like to ask the two of you to say a little bit about what your recent thoughts and feelings about what's going on in our society are, and how you're trying to work with that.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, so first up, thank you to Chris and everybody who came up with the idea of having this session today. And yeah, I found it daunting and actually quite funny, the idea that I would be here talking about psychology and my own journey in front of a room of professionals. Hello.
Whether you could turn the mic up or get a bit closer.
Oh yeah, sure.
I can hear you, but only just.
Sure. Is the mic, does that make a difference? They're not on, are they?
Failed. Hang on. Press the end and hold until the blue thing comes on.
Yes. Good. Thanks for that. I'm actually here because I think in early October, after I gave a speech in Kendal, it was only the second speech I'd ever given about deep adaptation after my paper came out in July. And it was a private event with people who work in Nature England and in the Lake District National Park. And it was the second speech I gave, and once again, tears. And some people feeling panicked, talking about running home to see their children, and one or two people feeling quite angry at me. Like aggressive, like, what do you expect? How do you expect us to respond? What do you think you're doing? And I was feeling my way forward really in terms of how do I talk about this in public? Because when I wrote that paper, it was a little bit of a selfish act. It was me just wanting to express myself about my own conclusions and a bit of grieving in public, and really a way of holding myself to account and making sure I move on and I don't sort of stay in this sort of weird sort of way of having this private truth and then sort of pretending in public that something else is worth talking about and working on. So I didn't expect it I wrote it for my profession, the sustainable business field, and I didn't expect it to really land that well there, let alone go anywhere else. So I was unsure about what to do in terms of talking in public about it. And so I remember I looked up the CPA website and a couple of emails I could find, and the subject line was simply help. And it was, I don't want to give talks anymore about this. I don't want to do podcasts, I don't want to be on the radio, because I'm just seeing the kind of impacts it's having. And I realised that going forward, if I'm going to be engaged in public life on this, I kind of feel I need to know more about how it lands with people and how people can be supported, but also how I can be supported in having those conversations. So I was very pleased to hear what's happened since, with the Climate Psychology Alliance developing a professional practice around that. How many people in the room are engaged in that work now, just to see? So, super. I'm really pleased to see that's underway. And I signpost it when people get in touch. So that's my connection with the CPA. Ro, is there any questions that arise from just that short context setting about why I'm here?
I was thinking that when I read your paper, the thing which struck me most forcibly about it was that this was the anguished cry of somebody who had recently let the reality of what climate change is come right through, and it was the anguish in that paper that I think spoke to me most strongly in it. And I suppose I saw that with a kind of sense of recognition from my experience of working with people. Obviously not just about climate change, but yes, about climate change as well. But that moment when something becomes impossible to defend yourself against anymore. And so I think that was my first response to it. And I think maybe that's connected with the experience which you've just described, of then trying to find a way of communicating this to other people, and then being perhaps quite overwhelmed by what happens as you do.
Yeah, so definitely anguish in the paper, all kinds of emotions. Yeah. Grief, panic, everything.
Yeah.
But also a faith or trust in inquiry, learning, truth, dialogue, connection.
Right.
So that was also why I wanted to put it out in the world, and also why it felt good to be rejected by that management journal, because it meant I could put this out, and it would be read by more than 3 people, and read now rather than in 18 months with the journal cycle.
Because you come from a particular bit of work. I mean, you were part of the sustainability, corporate social responsibility world, I think, weren't you? Which is a world which has embraced a particular way of thinking about climate and these issues. This idea of the triple bottom line, and it felt to me when I saw that was where you were coming from. I thought, yes, I could understand this. That you were coming from somewhere which had, in a way, said we think about sustainability, we think about climate, but only a little bit. That you were kind of, in a way, kicking your own profession goodbye in some way at that point. Would that be right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It was. Yes, there was the publishing the paper in the way I did, and also with the letter to the editor explaining why I'm just issuing it and I can't change it according to the reviewer's requests, was an act of letting go.
Yes.
And that came about because there was a lot building up to it. So I first gave a speech on deep adaptation in December 2016 because I was invited to keynote at a conference, the 10th anniversary of a centre I helped set up on sustainable business. And it was going to be about climate and business. And one of my ex-students, who is director of the centre now, asked me to give like a typical pep talk about we're doing well, but not everyone's doing it, and we need to do more. The speech was going to be the first week of December 2016, and as I got closer and closer to giving that talk, it felt, I felt like a fraud. It felt like a complete lie, and so that's when I had 200 people who work on climate and business in the audience, and I said, I think it's too late. I think we have clear evidence that everything we've been doing over the last decade since the Rio Earth Summit has achieved nothing on an aggregate level. So, for example, half of all human carbon emissions have come since 1992, and the evolution of the concept of sustainability and sustainable development. And so, and I don't know what that means, but I do know it means stopping pretending to each other, stopping pretending that because a multinational corporation has now said something in their annual report about the circular economy that somehow will fix climate change. And I was amazed at the positive response from people in the coffee break, but it was basically welcoming my bravery, saying they shared the idea, but they didn't know what to do about it. And things I didn't either, and so I had to take a year off my job, a year unpaid sabbatical to actually look closer at this. And to be honest, that was also because of the title of professor. It gives you a sense of identity and status, and so if that is actually a trap. Because you fear about stepping outside your expertise, or just when you realise your set of expertise is no longer valid or is no longer relevant to you or the world. It's not just like an easy way of changing job. It's like giving up on this accolade. So my year off was really important because then I just realised I could have a lot of fun without earning much money and without anyone knowing who I was. And then I thought, that's okay. But I thought I won't walk away. I'm going to cause a fuss before I walk away.
I think what you're describing is something which is in a way very, very, very familiar to me. And I'll talk a little bit about a piece of research which Paul Hoggett and I did, where we interviewed activists about the journey which they'd taken. And I've since used this idea of this journey as a means of looking at the experiences I think everybody needs to go through in order to actually really cope with the situation that we face. But this journey starts with an epiphany, and I think that's what you're describing. There's a moment where suddenly the world as you were looking at it doesn't make sense anymore. And I think for a lot of people, this arises from a state that they've been in previously, which is a state which psychoanalysis calls disavowal. And disavowal is psychoanalysis' kind of proper name for what other people call denial. And it's describing a very particular state which is socially sanctioned about climate change. And it's that state where you both know and don't know that something is true, or that something is happening. So you will find that, when you look at surveys about climate change, that the majority of people say that they know that it's happening and they're worried about it. But if you actually explore a bit more deeply, they don't really want to feel that it affects them. I think in your paper you talked about Stanley Cohen's implicative denial. And I think what psychoanalysis adds to this idea of implicative denial is an understanding of how it operates as a defence inside the individual mind. And Sally Weintraub describes this very well in the book which she edited, which I'm sure a lot of you have read. There's that moment of negation where you say, no, it can't possibly be true. And that then gives way to this split in the mind where you know with one part of yourself that yes, climate change is real, it's to do with me, it's very, very serious, it's an emergency. And with the other part of your mind, you actually obliterate it. It's vanished. And you carry on with your life as usual. And this is the state which I think an awful lot of people, even those, as you're describing, within the sustainability world that you were working in, they're actually operating in that kind of, with that kind of defence. And the problem with this defence, which I think psychoanalysis discusses very well, is what happens when that defence comes under pressure. And what happens is that the anxiety returns. People become very angry, people will talk to you with contempt about the fact that you've brought it to their notice. And I think some of the reactions which you were getting, which you were describing in your talk, belong to that, what happens when you make that kind of head-on confrontation with somebody's disavowal. Because they've been used to being able to maybe chat at work about, well, I'm the sustainability officer, I'm the green officer, and I'm sorting out the recycling bins. And oh yes, I did manage to book my tickets for Tenerife. And there's no contradiction in the two statements, that one is about a very minor action and the other is about a very major kind of action. So I think that process of disavowal is very powerful.
Is there a psychological term for that moment of when somebody challenges that disavowal and what you mentioned, the word contempt? So, because I'll just say why, is that I was amazed that so it came out at the end of July and now we're April, so I was amazed that until the last month I've not really been getting very many angry written critiques, but now I am from different directions, and the sign that they're angry is there's a lot of projection or sort of saying what I think or what my emotions are. So there's your disdain for this, your undermining of X. There's a lot of that in these critiques, and they're coming from different places. People who believe in extinction think that I'm lying, and I'm in denial. People who believe that we must have a vision of a promised land of ecological nirvana on this planet. They think that I'm undermining change. People who think that we need to do everything we can to save the species, which means we need to drop all this lovey-dovey hippie stuff that I talk about and start tooling up to defend ourselves. It's all manner of people are now, just in the last month, coming from all sides, expressing, quite well. There's anger in there. So
I think people's reactions are often very different. But I think that people will often try to defend the state, the state that they're in, or they will look for other means of calming themselves. So I can give examples, perhaps more from psychotherapy, but. I think you're likely to find a lot of very different reactions when you're saying something which challenges a psychological state of that kind. And I think what it points to is the need to think about the situations that we try to create when we talk to people about things which are very difficult. And I think this is something which